Hi, Tom.
Audrey.
Hello. For those of you listening, I am here with Tom Haine, and he is the state's attorney of Madison County, Illinois, which is the eighth largest county in Illinois. And he was just telling me that the state's attorney is an elected prosecutor or chief law enforcement officer. And the job is similar to what in most states would be called the district attorney.
That's
But
right.
in Illinois, they have a slightly different system and they call that job the state's attorney.
That's right. That's right. But we represent only the county. So
Okay.
yeah, appreciate. Honored to be on. Honored to be on with the esteemed Audrey Shangold.
Yeah. Um, Good. So I guess the main question of the show is, I don't really read the news, so I just get someone who does to tell me what's going on. Yeah, could you tell me what's going on in the news, including in Alton, Illinois, which is in your district? Sorry about that.
Yes, my hometown of Alton, Illinois. Well, there's tons of stuff going on in the news as you could see if you read the news, Audrey. But you should read the news, But then you have less to talk about in this podcast. Well, one major thing going on in Alton, which has actually made national news, there was a giant sinkhole that opened up right under a couple soccer fields at our local park. It's wild. You should look up Alton sinkhole and you'll be astounded at the pictures. Um, there was a new like AstroTurf field put in the local park where my kids play, ultimate football or flag football and soccer. Big park, and at like 5 a.m. in the morning, about a month and a half ago, there was a mine under the field that collapsed, and like 100-foot hole opened up in the middle of the field, taking like benches and a whole light system down, just fall down into the sinkhole.
Were
And
people harmed?
no one was harmed, but it was just a chilling moment because you could see there's a video, there's a security camera that that captures the moment that the sinkhole opened, and there are all these benches where typically are these kids playing soccer or football that are just sitting out in the middle of the field, and all of a sudden everything disappears. This enormous 100-foot hole,
That
and
sounds terrifying.
it's terrifying, and it's also kind of a question of like what didn't make the news in the sense of it could have been. I mean, gosh, most horrific tragedy. You could be watching your kids' games, and then like the team disappears down a sinkhole. It's just amazingly scary. So they shut down the whole park, and you should look up the pictures because it just looks like something out of computer generation. It's like this perfectly flat green field, and in the middle there's this huge hole. It looks like a meteor hit the field. Um, so shut down the whole park, and now they have to do all these tests on all the mines that are under this park. Which now there's all these questions about the extent of the mines and the safety of the mines, etc. It's this very extensive park, so that's a
So
major thing happening in the news, Audrey.
it sounds major. Were these mines like they were old mines from dozens of years ago, or are they
No,
active mines?
that's the odd part. It's active,
Okay.
but there are these tunnels that are extent. They're it's not an open pit mine. It's one of these tunnel mines for limestone. Is what I understand. Okay,
Yeah.
from the news reports, and so there's like this web of underground tunnels that have been burrowed into this area that are still ongoing. So it's unclear whether or not the sinkhole was related to like an old part of the mine,
Yeah.
but the mine itself is still operational. So that's a part of the question: is how is it being run? How could this happen? How could there be a huge cavern? I mean, you see this video. It must be an enormous cavern. There's like a 50-foot tall light pole that just disappears completely, entirely
Yeah.
into the hole. And so there must have been an enormous cavern under there, under the main field in the main park in the city, and nobody knew about it. It's just wild.
Right.
So there's lots of questions and few answers at this point. So we'll see.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting as it unfolds. Okay, so
Yeah.
most important national news of the past 2 or 3 weeks is this story in Alton. And then what would be like the second or like what are the less important things that are going on?
Well, we got the Supreme Court's been had quite a term. I actually haven't done as much of the reading of the actual opinions as I wish. I've skimmed some of them, but it's been really exciting to see what they've been doing on issues that are near and dear to a lot of conservatives' hearts. So um, the big one, I think, from the administrative state perspective, in terms of reining in the bureaucracy, is the one that ends Chevron deference, um, which is an important, you know, long-standing rule that federal courts have deferred to agencies' interpretations of their enabling statutes and interpretations of statutes that govern that area that they're regulating in, and so the courts will just defer to the agency's interpretation, and rather than doing their own sort of analysis of the question. And so that did is that kind of enabled bureaucrats to write their own rules and then interpret their own rules in this self-perpetuating cycle. And so that the Supreme Court has clarified now that the federal courts will not give any deference to agencies' interpretations of their statutes, and they will interpret them themselves, which is I think, a great thing for the rule of law, because it reflects, the interpretation of the statutes as written by the courts, and then if Congress doesn't like that interpretation by the courts, they can change the statute. So it's a nice, clean way of re-energizing some
Democracy or
democracy, rule of law, and then also a kind of there's this. I feel like Congress has over time just delegated so much of its authority to these agencies out of a sense of probably apathy. And so this will kind of force Congress to re-engage long term. Probably no short term effects, but a lot of good long term effects.
yeah, that makes sense. So who are the people who are like most unhappy about this development? I mean, I assume people who care a lot about some of the agencies doing things the way they're currently doing them, or what are the like not at the legal analysis level, but just at sort
Yeah,
of the practical level, who's freaking out the most about this?
I think it's probably kind of progressives.
Okay.
One way of understanding it. It probably cuts across the ideological spectrum in some interesting ways, but I think progressives understand the administrative state to be. They want a very active administrative state and bureaucracy in terms of regulating the economy and regulating potentially private conduct, and so empowering the state to intervene, in their view, for the good of society, but it limits freedom of other actors in the society if regulators and bureaucrats are sort of empowered and active in that way. And I think they're upset about this opinion because it will probably make regulators less energetic, because
Yeah.
they won't be able to take aggressive steps and then be deferred to by the courts.
Yep.
So over time, I think it'll make yeah, the bureaucratic aggressiveness less palpable, and there'll probably be fewer regulations and less confident bureaucrats, which frankly sounds great to me. But
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think for a lot of progressives, they find it troubling long term.
Interesting. And then sort of bracketing sort of questions of like, the constitutional questions. Are there any consequences of this decision that you think are going to have like maybe growing pains, or like, agencies that, uh, they might have their abilities curtailed in a way that you're like not excited about until or unless Congress does something to change it?
I don't know. I think again, it's going to be a longer term proposition. I think
Yeah.
it may be the case that you don't see the impact because you can't measure lack of action by agencies.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like
Of
what
course.
doesn't occur. How do you identify what doesn't occur? Um, and so it's hard to identify it for that reason. I think I don't see any negative effects. I think I see mostly positive effects. I think it'll be hard because there are just so many regulations that the courts. Part of the reason for the Chevron deference is that it's really hard for courts to have a understanding of like highly technical regulatory areas that the regulators, that's their job, that's their whole world, and so that's where the deference came from.
Yeah.
And so now they're removing that. They have to step into those roles and understand areas of regulation that are highly technical. And I think it's going to remain to be seen how capable the courts are going to be at that. And but they have to do it, otherwise, removing the deference won't have any impact on holding regulators accountable. So it's going to be a kind of a question of resource management in terms of judicial branch and
Yeah. Do you
how
think?
good judges are at doing their jobs.
Yeah, and do you think practically speaking, it might end up at sort of an intermediate course where, like, by removing deference, basically judges have the ability to not defer, but they also at times will say, well, as far as we can tell, this is within the realms of a reasonable interpretation of this. Um,
Right, exactly. I think that could well happen, especially when judges aren't necessarily understanding what's going on.
yeah,
I think there can be an opaque nature to a lot of these regulatory agencies that, like patent issues or, highly technical, you know, physical, the physical world in a highly technical way, regulating nuclear, you know,
right,
nuclear fusion research. Who knows, right? You can imagine a federal judge who was appointed and confirmed by the Senate for his legal acumen, looking at a challenge to a regulation on the basis of it being outside the bounds of the enabling statute, and just getting cross-eyed, and and
right,
then and then as a practice deferring to the agency without maybe saying that's what he's doing, but just out of a sense of kind of laziness, maybe, or a lack of understanding. So we'll see how it works. And there's tons of judges. Every judge is different, so it's really going to depend on the ability of the judges to do a good job at holding regulators accountable. But now they won't be able to officially defer, and
yeah,
so it will remove that maybe easy out that they would have before. And
yeah.
if they're going to defer, they can't say that. They got to find a way to save face. Another way, it's harder to do that, and maybe it's easier to just make a ruling on the merits and
Yeah.
do your
Yeah, that
best.
makes
So
sense. Or judges will start hiring like specialists as well as like legal clerks. You know,
yeah,
like
yeah.
you'll have like a scientist on your team and those kinds of things.
And I think there's a nice healthy enforcement that it has over time, because heck, if a federal judge can't understand a regulation enough to rule whether or not it's within a statute, I think we're in a troubling place from a rule of law perspective,
Yeah, yeah,
because the whole point of a regulation, if you have a law, it has to be understandable. It has to be clear so you can follow it. Whereas if something is so precise and so technical that not even a federal judge can figure out whether or not it abides by the enabling statute, I think you know there should be, in my view, a kind of presumption that should not be a regulation. That should be something
right.
that's just up to um, a free society making free choices. And so hopefully self there's a kind of self-enforcing mechanism where regulators aren't getting close to that line because judges won't have time for it. Rather than erring on the side of trusting the regulators, now they're going to err on the side of, why are you writing this regulation that is putting me on the spot and making me look dumb because I can't even understand it, and so I'm going to strike it down.
Yeah,
So we'll see. We'll see.
cool. So, all right. So Chevron deference has been struck down. Alton had this terrifying sinkhole, and then my impression is that there have been some important pieces of news related to the election, like some court cases involving Trump and like maybe Biden is senile. Um, is there like other stuff? I'd love to hear about those, and also like because those are really the only other news items I know about going on right now.
Yeah.
I know a little about what's happening in Europe, but in the US, those are
Yeah.
really the only other 2 pieces of news. I heard a rumor that COVID is maybe having an uptick, but again,
Oh,
haven't looked at the news, and so that might just be where the person I was talking to was from. But yeah, are there
God,
other news stories? And I'd love to hear about the
COVID,
election
ha-
kind of
COVID
election.
having COVID having an uptick. Man, that is wild to imagine. I think might be just in time for the next election. Put on my conspiracy hat. No. So Biden being senile, I found. I don't know. Did you watch the debate?
I did not.
Oh my gosh, it
I
was
heard it was yeah.
unreal. I wouldn't have missed it for the world just because you knew it was going to be interesting, just because both candidates have such you know differing personalities, and it's the first time they've met since 2020, which was the most volatile and insane election ever. I think
Yep.
in my memory, and it did not disappoint in the sense that it was amazing to watch. I watched it with my mom and my boys, and my wife Eva, as you know, dear friend of yours. She was off. I think had a mother's reading group, much more productive probably. But the boys and I watched it with my mom, and my mom is getting a little older. She's 75 now, so watching with her was interesting because the first 15 minutes, coming right out of the gate, Biden's age was incredibly palpable. It was just amazing how different he looked, even than Trump. And they're not all that far apart in age, but he
Yep.
looked like he was 30 years older.
Right.
And um, and it was really painful to watch, and it was really sad actually. I felt really sad, and it was interesting to watch it with my mom, who again is getting older, and my dad passed just 3 years ago, and
Yeah.
so we kind of watched him age, and you don't feel good about watching a person who had virility and had clearly, Biden has been a good speaker in the past in the sense that he's just quick on his feet and he's energetic and he's been in politics for a long time. But to watch that so clearly just diminish in front of our own eyes was really sad. And so it wasn't a typical debate where you go in and you see, your guy beat the other guy and have these amazing moments of put downs or I remember the first Mitt Romney debate versus Biden in 2012 where Romney had a really great debate and Biden or sorry against Obama in
Yep.
2012 and Romney had a great debate and Obama had a really bad debate and that was very satisfying in the sense that Romney really got in some zingers but it was obviously Obama was he came back in the next debate and he's clearly with it and it wasn't here it just felt just sad and my mom was just sad and the boys they couldn't really figure out what's going on they couldn't understand him they couldn't um it, so there was a very interesting thing to observe and it felt like Trump did an amazing job of just kind of pulling back and letting Biden talk and it just got worse and worse and worse and there were some moments that were excruciating. I mean, the format was interesting too because each person was given 2 minutes and they had no interruptions and no audience. And so it was really kind of a pure talk between two people without any laugh track or, applause line or groanings or whatever. And so
Yeah.
nobody's playing to the crowd. And also nobody's interrupting the other. So you would have somebody ask a question and Biden would answer, but he's given 2 minutes. And there were several times where Biden only had like 15 seconds of material on like a huge question, like what are we going to do about Ukraine, or how do we how do we reduce illegal immigration? And he would launch in and have 15 seconds of gibberish, and then rather than have Trump launch in with the comeback or whatever, the debate moderators would ask the initial person again, oh, you still have 90 seconds left. What else would you like to say? And so it really highlighted um,
The
this
lack.
inability, the total, yeah, vacant nature of of the chief executive of the United States is really incredible to watch. And so I think since then it's just been amazing to see what's going on within the National Democratic Party, because it seems like what is usually looks like a kind of lockstep, locked in organization has really been visibly fractured in a way that's still going on. I don't think anybody knows what's going to happen. So
Right. And what's basically going on there is that Biden has said he's not stepping down, right? And
Biden has said he's not stepping down, and but he already has all the delegates lined up, and
yeah,
so if he doesn't step down, no one else can take his place, by force in terms of through the electoral process of the
right. They could
primary.
run as independents or something like that.
I think even that has, I think, I think the ability to run as an independent has also passed, because you have to be able to get on the ballot to run as an independent in order to be in the primary, in order to get on the general election ballot. Each state has its own time frame for that, and so I think that ship has largely sailed as well. I think RFK is the only one who maybe could do that, but I think even he is not even going to get on the ballot. Maybe even a majority of states. Maybe
Right.
he'll. So yeah, so it's really up to Biden, and it seems like this amazing family drama where it looks like his family is um, insisting that he stay, uh, which just seems just kind of wrong. As again, someone whose father aged pretty rapidly over the last few years of his life, the last thing he wanted to do is force someone like that into a huge spotlight where they get picked apart, and their inadequacies or difficulties in the last few years of their life are put on public display. And to have what seems to be the family members doing that is just kind of sordid, to be honest.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
um, I think I just saw in the news today that George Clooney, who is a huge donor to the Biden campaign, along with Obama. They had a fundraiser just a few weeks ago. He came out and said Biden needs to step aside. So, but then 2 days ago or 3 days ago, Biden sent a letter to all the House Democrats saying he's refusing to step aside. So, um, I don't know. It's an incredibly volatile time in the Democratic side. It's just amazing to watch in terms of its historical precedent. I don't think anything like this has ever happened in my memory in terms of sudden change this late in the game.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And my impression is this has dramatically increased Trump's chance of winning the election. Meaning, like, if it's Biden versus Trump, Trump is quite likely to win. Um, even if
Yeah,
even if he wouldn't in the event that Biden were like of sound mind.
I think that's right, because I think suddenly, usually, you have the establishment media is lockstep for whoever the Democratic candidate is, um, Biden in this case, and so they're not airing criticisms of him typically, or not doing it in a sustained way, and they're repeating defenses of the administration. It's just my observation of how the media landscape typically works, especially at the broadcast level. And so to see, and so usually, when that media establishment turns on a Democrat nationally, it's doing so to benefit potentially another national Democrat. That's one of the cynical ways to interpret when that happens. And in this case, though, it seems like the media establishment has turned, or has been definitely attacking Biden, or making him seem, damaging him electorally, due to this now sustained weeks of criticism about his inability to do the job, his lack of memory, his lack of energy, his lack of availability during the day. He's only apparently available to do work a couple hours a day. So, but that's just been a sustained barrage of criticism that definitely weakens him as a candidate, but it's coming from the media establishment, which is usually completely on his side. And so you would typically think that only happens when the media is ready to support some other person in Biden's place, but it looks like Biden's not going.
Yeah.
So it looks like they're damaging him with nobody riding into the rescue. Unless something, I mean, I don't, yeah, I feel like no one knows what's going to happen. And ironically, even the individuals at the very top maybe don't quite know exactly what's going to happen, which is just kind of amazing to see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. So and then on the other side, uh, so Trump is obviously benefiting from this.
Yes.
How do you have any have you been following his campaign closely? And I'm especially curious about all the stuff related to like the sovereign immunity ruling. Um,
Yes. That's a really interesting ruling. So yeah, of course, been following the campaign. Um, it's a hugely important election. Um, really, um, I think it's just one of the most important elections of our entire lifetime. Just the number of parts of our society that seem poised to pivot in one way or another
mhm,
seems to be adding up at this point. It just seems like a watershed moment. Um, and so it's a hugely important election, but the sovereign immunity piece is an even more interesting ruling. So the Trump campaign appealed to Trump appealed to the Supreme Court, arguing that they could not be prosecuted for any part of his time as president where he was acting in his official acts,
right.
conducting parts of his office, and that could be it's a very broad concept. And the prosecutors, in the documents case and these other federal indictments that Trump is under, argue that that is not clearly established and that there isn't a sort of blanket immunity for official acts that presidents have. Instead, it's much more limited. That presidents can face prosecutions if they act, for their own personal interest, even if they're doing so like within the purview of their office. So it really opens up a lot of liability if that's the position for every president to face prosecution after they leave office, because you can always you know, review past acts and interpret them potentially as having multiple intentions, multi-layered intentions, and then whoever the next person in office is can go back and prosecute his predecessor. And it's a really dangerous thing to do as a republic to, in my view, have a practice of politicizing prosecution, to make
Right.
prosecution a punishment for leaving office. If you make prosecution a punishment for leaving office, people won't leave,
Yes. Or
and
they'll
that
try not to.
or they'll try not to by any means necessary. And so that's how you have people who refuse to leave. I mean, Julius Caesar comes to mind, was somebody who famously was afraid of prosecution when he left office as a consul, and that's why he crossed the Rubicon. So I mean, that's way back in history. But that's a exact reason why he felt unable to leave office and took force to maintain himself in office, was because he feared prosecution, which you were immune from prosecution as a consul while a consul, but then immediately leaving office, you can be prosecuted. And so there had been created in the late republic a whole bad habit of prosecuting consuls as soon as they left office. And so, um, ironically, it's a strange thing to observe the interpretation of this ruling, because people say that creates it creates presidential volatility, like it empowers presidents to stay in office or to do whatever they want in office. But historically, I think it's clear that it actually reduces volatility around transfers of power, which is what you want. You want people who are in office to peacefully, if they lose an election, leave office, and rather than doing whatever they can to maintain their power. And so I think it actually increases the long-term viability of just hundreds of maybe another 250 more years of peaceful transfers of power between elections by the chief executive. I was actually talking to my brother's wife's parents. So they're from Venezuela, and so they were asking about this Supreme Court decision and what we thought about it over 4th of July. And so they have a really interesting perspective on this because they saw this process play out in Venezuela,
Right.
where the president, I believe it was the president of Venezuela before Chavez, left office. And after he left office, his, or maybe while he was in office, a separate, either while he left office or while he was in office, um, a separate government agency which had the power to do this in Venezuela prosecuted him for basically sending funds to another country that those funds weren't allocated by the Congress, and so it was like an illegal the allegation was it was an illegal transfer of funds that wasn't allocated by the Congress. So clearly within his authority as the president of the country to do so, in the sense that it's within the purview of his official acts, even if you disagree with it, even
Yeah.
if it's illegal in the sense that it's not authorized by the General Assembly, it's still an official act within the broad description. And he was put in jail, put under house arrest after he left, and that's what caused Venezuelan democracy to kind of, one of the things to kind of spiral out of control, is because it showed that presidents have to basically eliminate all countervailing power structures within the country, or they're going to face potential jail time for people who disagree with them on the merits. So, very interesting to see how that's played out, and to see other examples internationally that have gone down this road. And it's really good to see, I think, the Supreme Court kind of painting a safe path forward for presidential authority, so that they don't face these political prosecutions after leaving office. I think it's good for everybody.
Yeah. So, in your view, is there, because you can imagine extreme approaches on either, like on either side of this question, right? Like you can imagine, well, for example, like if a president commits a sort of like normal crime while they're in office in a non-official capacity, it
Right.
seems like this is something which um, it would be, it would be bad if there was no way to prosecute a president for like assassinating American citizens on American soil, uh,
Right. Right.
who are that person's political enemies or something like that. Um,
Right.
or uh, or just like committing crimes of passion or something, just kind of like
Right.
robbing a jewelry store. uh,
Right.
and so presumably most countries want to sort of like make it so that the president can't do that stuff. Um, and
Well,
I guess in our
yeah,
system, you can, like, the president could already be impeached for pretty much
that's
anything.
right.
Is that right?
That's
Uh,
right. High crimes and misdemeanors, which remains undefined, but clearly involves robbing a jewelry store.
yeah, yeah, robbing a jewelry store or like, y yeah. I'm not, maybe not parking violations, but assassinating political enemies would probably also fall in that
Should probably count. Yeah.
that category. So it's like, it seems like one approach you could take is like, well, we're just gonna assume that what the president does is while in office is non-criminal unless they're impeached. Um, is that standard strong enough, or is that too strong? And I guess also now we have this new thing of the president always gets impeached, right? Hopefully
Yeah.
that
But not
hopefully that
convicted.
doesn't stay as the new pattern, but
Yes, but not convicted, interestingly.
yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so I think, yeah, I think it's a question of official acts. So within the purview of the presidential activity, the robbing a jewelry store is not going to be anywhere close.
Yeah.
That's clearly not related to the job of president in any way. One interesting counterexample would be President Obama ordering the drone strike of an American citizen abroad, which he did,
Right.
without obviously a trial. Um, but that is, within the purview. That's clearly within the purview of his official duties because he ordered it as commander in chief. Um, so I think I think the question is not what fine grained crime by crime analysis is this impact this is not to go but down the line and to do a crime by crime analysis. Rather, it's to talk about broad incentives. So if you're talking about broad incentives from a president, broad incentives that constrain the dangerous activity of the chief executive. So how do we as a society constrain activity of a chief executive that we think would be dangerous?
Yeah.
And so from a self-interested perspective, the chief executive doesn't want to get impeached and convicted. That's
Right.
first off, right? So during his time in office, he can't be prosecuted while he's in office, but he also could be kicked out. And so I think that's the most potent disincentive on his
Yeah.
activity while in office. And I think what this does, and it's broad, it's very, very broad. And so I think if a chief executive commits acts that are sort of close to the line of potentially official or personal, that would be the kind of thing that you would assume would be subject to impeachment and conviction, right? Because those
Yeah.
are obviously highly questionable. And so you would have to worry about a kind of peaceful transfer of power situation in that vein, because they're the kinds of acts that are already they're already restrained in all the ways that we can think of restraining them through the constitutional process. And so what we're really talking about here are how do we prevent um, subsequent years later people looking back on a person's time in office when it ended and criminalizing it even more. So you can already kick somebody out, you can take their job as chief executive, and you can boot them as a society, and that is an extreme deterrence on their activity. But that after they leave office, can you then put them in jail? Would be the question. And the question in my mind is that I think the Supreme Court's wrestling with is sometimes the ability to put them in jail for some of this conduct that's official acts, but that you might disagree with, will actually make the chief executive more dangerous.
Right.
So that's the kind of broad incentive that I think the Supreme Court is talking about here, and I think over time these things will be fleshed out a little bit clearer. But I think it sets the kind of broad incentives in the right place.
Yeah. So
That makes sense.
you were pretty happy with that ruling. You didn't want it to be more permissive to the president or more harsh to the president.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty good. Yeah, I did. I thought it was good. I thought it was it was a statesman-like ruling, and I think it doesn't benefit any particular president. It just discusses the office of the president, and I think looks
Okay.
to the future. So.
There was a detail I heard about it. Again, not reading the news makes it hard to get a straight story on these things, but I was talking to someone, which is allowed. I was talking to someone, and they were telling me, okay, let's see if I remember this correctly, um, that if you were trying the president for something after they left office, which they did in their capacity as a totally private citizen, um, that you couldn't use official acts as evidence.
Yes, I think
For
that's right.
example, is that right?
I think that's right, but frankly, I am not sure exactly how that operates.
Yeah.
But I heard that in context of it putting some of the New York prosecution in jeopardy
Okay.
because they prosecuted Trump under a New York statute, but they used evidence that related to his official acts and that was before he was president, right? But they used evidence as part of that prosecution from his time as president while he was doing arguably official acts. So I do think that has put that prosecution and that situation in legal jeopardy going forward. That's the
Yeah.
context I heard that, but I don't know exactly how that operates, to be honest.
Okay, that makes sense. Cool.
Another
Well,
interesting thing the Supreme Court did, Audrey, is they also, this is near and dear to our heart here in Madison County, is they upheld municipalities' abilities to regulate unlawful encampments.
Oh,
Um,
interesting.
yes, so we've been enacting municipal ordinances starting about last November. I worked with a local city to design a ban on unlawful encampments.
Okay.
So using, living habitation on public land,
Yeah.
basically. And it was highly controversial at the time, but we got it through the local municipality. It's not a criminal statute; it's a fine. It's an ordinance violation that involves, procedures for how to, seize property with warnings and how long to hold it. People can reobtain it. So it's a pretty, I think, humane, um, reasonable ordinance. But during that whole process, um, a lot of folks had argued that such bans are unconstitutional. And they were supported in that argument by a Ninth Circuit decision, which has hamstrung, cities across the West Coast from enforcing homelessness issues or enforcing encampment bans,
Hmm.
because the Ninth Circuit opinion had concluded you cannot ban encampments. You cannot ban camping on public land unless you have sufficient shelter space.
Oh, interesting.
And so it basically mandated public shelters,
Yeah.
which is hugely expensive. And so people didn't have the ability to build the shelters. And so they just couldn't enforce encampment bans. And so that was before the Supreme Court. And we passed these ordinances before the Supreme Court ruled, but out of an expectation that they would support them, just because, frankly, I think the counter argument is just kind of wild. I didn't think it was going to fly.
Yeah.
And they resoundingly upheld the ability of local municipalities to take a kind of, flexible approach to these issues, and that they have these tools in their toolbox. They don't have to build shelters if they want to enforce basic hygiene, or protect parks, or whatever from encampments, or from um, vagrancy issues. And I thought that's a really hugely important thing, I think, for a lot of municipalities going forward, and it was directly important to a lot of our local municipalities, because had it gone the other way, they could have faced some litigation. But the
Yeah.
way it went, they're on really good legal ground now.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and what was the name of that? Do you remember what the name of that court?
Grants Pass, yes.
Pasts? Pasts?
Grants Pass is the actual court case. Let me look
Okay.
up here. Grants Pass versus Johnson. So Grants Pass is the municipality
Okay.
that had passed it originally, and they even have a stronger one than our ordinance. Their ordinance is a criminal one. So if you're caught camping on public land, you could be jailed.
Yeah.
Whereas we don't have that. Where we are, we just have civil fines and seizure of property if you store it on public land.
Yeah. Meaning if you're camping, they might take your tent is basically.
Yeah, exactly, and kick you off, force you to leave. If you refuse to leave, then you could be arrested.
Yeah.
But because you're in violation of the law. Before that, a lot of municipalities had no rules about it, and so you'd have a camp pop up, and suddenly you're faced with a lot of citizen complaints, and then you look at the ordinances, and there's no rule against it actually. So then, if you enforce it, you could then face real litigation because it looks like discrimination.
Yeah.
Um, so anyway, very interesting, and we were very happy about that one.
That's interesting. And how did it play out? Like, was it ultimately, I mean, you said the law that you guys enacted in Alton was controversial, but obviously passed. And
Yes.
have people been pretty happy with the way it's been implemented, or is its implementation controversial, or do you have a,
No, I think it's been popular. Yeah, how it's been implemented. I think the main, the idea that it quote criminalizes homelessness was, I think, frankly, just kind of a talking point that got people riled up. Certain segment of people really riled up as against it. But I think once it's being enforced, I think people realize it's totally reasonable, and it's not being enforced in a draconian, inhumane way. But then once it passed in Alton, what we did is I packaged up the draft ordinance, and I sent it to all the other municipalities, all the other mayors in the county, and recommended that they pass the same thing. And since then, I think all of them have done so,
oh,
with
well,
maybe one exception. So we basically now have a uniform system of ordinances that are really clear, really humane, but protect our parks.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. Um, Interesting. All right. Well, is there anything else going on that I should know about, before I head into the weekend, so I don't sound like an idiot when someone brings something up and I have to just say, and nod my head like I know what I'm going, like I
Yes,
know what's going on.
you should know about one thing, Audrey.
What's
The
that?
National Eucharistic Pilgrimage.
In Indianapolis.
Well, that's where it ends. But it just went through Alton.
Oh, that's so exciting. So
So yeah, go
I've
ahead.
I encountered it in New York, and I didn't go, but some of my other family went in Indiana. So
It is so wonderful.
I've
So they,
encountered 2 of the 4 branches, but not the one you just encountered.
it's so cool. So they have this crew of pilgrims who are driving the whole length, and they have like a monstrance set up in the van. So they're doing adoration the whole time. Um, and then they go and they schedule these pilgrimages in towns along the route. So they'll have like multiple pilgrimages per day. Like one town will take it in the morning, and then they'll pick it up and go to another town. So it's not they're not walking the whole time, but
Okay.
they do have these series of pilgrimages, and one of them was in Alton, and it was beautiful. It was totally beautiful. It was just amazing. They have these priests that come along with the pilgrims who are lay people, and they give it's welcomed into the church in the evening. We're welcomed into St. Mary's, which is my home parish there, and we had a wonderful presentation about the Eucharist there at in the parish hall in the evening, packed to the gills, packed to the gills in a way that I hadn't seen in a long time. And the priest described it as the way that the 4 branches work is it's like doing a sign of the cross via adoration over the whole country,
That's beautiful.
which
Yeah.
is beautiful. And he also described it as kind of like these flaming lines of blessing across the country, which everyone appreciated because of obviously the state our country's in. And then the next morning they did a 3 mile walking pilgrimage from one church through to a convent and then down to our local church, and we had 250 people. You had like people walking with walkers. You had young people, old people that just came out of the woodwork walking through the streets of Alton, kids, and then it started pouring rain. Everybody kept going,
Yeah.
and it was a beautiful day, and it was also just another reminder of all these wonderful ways of participating in the renewal of our country that don't involve like political agitation or online typing. It's like this was the most palpable and meaningful thing, and nobody had to say a word. You're walking, you're adoring, you're saying the rosary, you're praying, united, no ideologies, just focused on the Lord. So it was really quite a wonderful thing. And if it's nearby, you guys should jump on board one of these pilgrimages because they're worth the time.
Yeah. No, that's great. Yeah, I walked a few miles with it when it was in New
Oh, you
York.
did? Okay,
I
cool.
was It was a good, I mean, maybe it was a mile. It wasn't that far, but it was an incredible scene, and I think they did benediction on the Brooklyn Bridge.
Oh, so
Mm.
cool.
Yeah,
That's
so
great. That's great.
yeah, but it's yeah, it's cool. It would actually be very cool to like catch a little bit of all 4, as it gets close to Indianapolis, you could very easily like drive around from catch all 4 branches before the
Yeah, they mean the middle. It does make me think that's going to be quite the event. So,
Yeah, I suspect so too. Um, yeah, a friend was telling me about someone they met, or I wanna say maybe it was their homily at their church, was telling the story of one of the pilgrims, and I don't know if you heard this, but, he's walking along and some guy comes up to him and asks him like, "Oh, what's going on? What is this thing?" And he's like, "Oh, this is Jesus, and we're following we're following the Eucharist, across the country," or whatever. And the guy says, "Okay," and then a few minutes later, they keep marching, and the guy comes, like, sprinting towards him, like, chasing him down, and I guess he had some story where, like, that man had previously been a Christian and had stopped for many years, and then that morning, he was like, picked up his Bible and was like, "I'm gonna try to figure this out," and he's like, "I don't know what to do." And then he encountered this, and he's like, Jesus, where are you? Then this there he is.
Beautiful.
So
It's
yeah.
beautiful. And also, one of my friends, I'll just pull it up here. We sent it out to a local Christian group for some workout group, and we sent out some of these pictures because it went by the park that we worked out in. And one of the guys said, "Epic, doing hard, meaningful things with the brethren. I love it." And so true. So true. That's all you need. That's how you renew the country. Doing hard, meaningful things with the brethren.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
We should all be in one of these workout groups.
we should. We should.
Um, good. Well, thank you so much, Tom. This was wonderful, and now I will make less of a fool of myself in the coming week. Um,
Well, I doubt you do that, but I'm honored to be on Audrey Doesn't Read the News, and however I can participate in spreading the word, you let me know.
all right. Thank you, Tom. Will do.
Okay, tell everybody hi.
I will. Talk to
All
you
right,
soon. Bye bye.
see ya.